In the quiet mountain town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, where wildlife encounters were as common as morning coffee, the Henderson family thought they had seen everything nature could offer during their 15 years of living on the edge of the wilderness. But nothing could have prepared them for the desperate visitor who arrived at their door on that stormy October evening, a visitor whose urgent cries and frantic behavior would challenge everything they believed about the relationship between wild animals and humans. When a large female bobcat began clawing at their front door and crying with heartbreaking desperation, most families would have called animal control and locked themselves inside. But the Hendersons made a decision that would lead them into the dark forest on a rescue mission they never could have imagined. What they discovered when they followed this distressed mother into the wilderness would shock them to their core, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most desperate circumstances, and that the bonds of motherhood transcend every boundary that nature seems to impose. The first scratching sounds at the front door of the Henderson family's mountain cabin came just after 8 p.m. When the October storm was reaching its peak intensity, Sarah Henderson, 42-year-old wildlife biologist who worked for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department, initially assumed the noise was just debris blown against the house by the fierce winds that had been battering their property all evening. But when the scratching turned into deliberate, rhythmic knocking, followed by what sounded unmistakably like crying, Sarah knew she was dealing with something far more unusual than storm damage. Her husband Mike, a 45-year-old park ranger with 20 years of experience in wildlife management, looked up from his evening paperwork with the same expression of concern and curiosity that drawn them both to careers working with animals. "That's not the wind," Mike said, setting down his coffee and moving toward the front window. Their two children, 15-year-old Emma and 12-year-old Jake, emerged from their rooms where they had been doing homework. Drawn by the increasingly urgent sounds coming from their front door, Sarah approached the door cautiously, her professional training reminding her that desperate animals could be dangerous animals, regardless of their species or apparent intentions. But when she looked through the peephole, what she saw left her speechless. A large female bobcat stood on their front porch, her tawny coat darkened by rain and her distinctive tufted ears flattened against her head in obvious distress. The wild cat was deliberately pawing at the door with her front claws while making vocalizations that sounded remarkably like crying, not the typical growls or hisses associated with aggressive or territorial behavior, but plaintive, desperate calls that seemed designed to attract attention and communicate urgent need. "It's a bobcat," Sarah whispered to her family, her voice filled with wonder and concern, "and she's asking for help." Mike joined Sarah at the window, his ranger's experience allowing him to quickly assess the animal's condition and behavior. The bobcat showed no signs of rabies or other diseases that might cause unusual behavior. Instead, her body language suggested extreme distress and urgency, as if she were trying to communicate something critically important to the humans inside the house. "In 20 years of working with wildlife, I've never seen anything like this," Mike said quietly. "Wild bobcats avoid human contact at all costs. For one to approach a house and actively seek attention, something must be terribly wrong." Emma pressed her face to the window, her teenage fascination with animals overriding any fear she might have felt. "Look at her eyes, Mom. She's not threatening us. She's begging us." The bobcat seemed to sense the human attention and intensified her efforts to communicate. She looked directly at the window where the family was gathered, made eye contact with Sarah, and let out a series of cries that were so obviously distressed and urgent that even 12-year-old Jake understood something was desperately wrong. "She's trying to tell us something," Jake observed with the clarity that sometimes comes from youth. "Animals don't cry like that unless they really need help." As if responding to Jake's words, the bobcat moved away from the door and took several steps toward the forest, then turned back to look at the house expectantly. When no one emerged, she returned to the door and repeated her urgent pawing and crying, then again moved toward the trees and looked back. "She wants us to follow her," Sarah realized, her scientific mind struggling to process behavior that challenged everything she knew about wild animal psychology. "She's leading behavior. She wants to show us something." The question facing the Henderson family was whether they could trust a wild predator enough to follow her into the dark forest during a storm, or whether the veterinarian's instincts that had drawn them to a lifetime of helping animals would compel them to take a risk that could change all their lives forever. The decision to follow the distressed Bobcat into the storm-lashed forest wasn't made lightly. Sarah and Mike Henderson had spent their careers managing the delicate balance between helping wildlife and maintaining the safe boundaries that protected both humans and animals. But the female bobcat's behavior was so unprecedented and her distress so obvious that their professional instincts overrode their caution. "We stay together, we bring emergency supplies, and we don't take any unnecessary risks," Mike instructed as the family prepared for what could be a dangerous nighttime rescue mission. He gathered flashlights, first aid supplies, and the tranquilizer kit that Sarah kept for wildlife emergencies, while she collected the portable veterinary equipment that had helped save countless animals throughout her career. Emma and Jake, despite their parents' initial reluctance to bring them along, proved instrumental in the decision-making process. The bobcat's reaction to the teenagers was remarkably different from typical wild animal behavior, rather than showing fear or aggression toward the young humans. She seemed to recognize them as part of the helping group and adjusted her communication. Accordingly, "It's waiting for all of us," Emma observed as they prepared to venture outside. "Look how she positions herself where she can see the whole family. She knows we're a unit." The moment the Henderson family stepped onto their porch, the bobcat's behavior shifted from desperate pleading to purposeful guidance. She moved approximately 20 feet ahead of them, maintaining a pace that accommodated human movement while frequently looking back to ensure they were following. Her path through the forest was deliberate and efficient, suggesting she had made this journey multiple times and knew exactly where she was leading them. The storm made the journey treacherous, with fallen branches and slippery terrain creating obstacles that challenged even experienced outdoors people like the Hendersons. But the bobcat seemed to anticipate these difficulties, choosing routes that avoided the most dangerous areas and pausing when the family needed time to navigate particularly difficult sections. "She's protecting us," Sarah realized as she watched the bobcat wait patiently while Jake carefully climbed over a fallen log. "She understands that we're vulnerable in this environment, and she's adjusting her guidance to keep us safe." After 45 minutes of steady hiking through increasingly dense forest, the bobcat's pace began to quicken, and her vocalizations shifted from guiding calls to urgent cries that suggested they were approaching their destination. The family could hear her distress escalating as she led them toward a steep, rocky outcropping that jutted up from the forest floor like a natural fortress. The bobcat stopped at the base of the rocks and began making the same desperate crying sounds that had first brought her to the Hendersons' door. She looked up at a crevice in the rocks approximately 15 feet above the ground, then back at the family, her message clear even without words. Mike trained his powerful flashlight on the area where the bobcat was indicating, and what he saw explained everything. Wedged into a narrow crack in the rock face, barely visible except for occasional movement, were 3 tiny bobcat kittens. The babies appeared to be trapped in a space too narrow for their mother to reach them, and too high for her to help them escape. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, understanding flooding through her as she realized the full scope of what they were facing. The storm must have caused a rock slide that trapped her babies. She couldn't get them out alone, so she came to us for help. The female bobcat's desperate journey to their door now made perfect sense. Faced with the impossible task of rescuing her kittens from a trap that her claws and strength couldn't overcome, I had made the extraordinary decision to seek help from the one species that possessed the tools and intelligence necessary to save her babies' lives. The sight of 3 tiny bobcat kittens trapped in the rock crevice 15 feet above the ground presented the Henderson family with a rescue challenge that would test both their technical skills and their courage. The babies were clearly in immediate danger, weak from exposure and hunger, barely moving except for occasional faint cries that had driven their mother to seek help from humans. Despite every instinct telling her to avoid contact with their species, they've been up there for hours, maybe since the storm started, Sarah assessed. using her veterinary experience to evaluate the kitten's condition from a distance. They're hypothermic and probably dehydrated. They don't have much time. Mike began analyzing the technical challenges of the rescue. The rock face was steep and slippery from the rain, with loose stones that could shift unexpectedly under a climber's weight. The crevice where the kittens were trapped was narrow wide enough to hold the babies, but too small for an adult bobcat to enter, positioned at an angle that would make extraction difficult even with proper equipment. I can reach them, Emma declared, studying the rock formation with the confidence of a teenager who had spent years rock climbing in the Colorado mountains with her father. I'm small enough to get into spaces that would be too tight for you or Mom, and I have the climbing experience to make it safely. The mother bobcat seemed to understand that the humans were planning a rescue attempt for her babies. Other than showing territorial aggression or fear, she positioned herself where she could observe the operation while staying out of the way. Her behavior suggested complete trust in the family that had answered her desperate plea for help. Mike rigged a climbing system using the emergency equipment he had brought, creating safety lines and anchors that would allow Emma to ascend to the trapped kittens safely. His park ranger training included technical rescue techniques, but this was the first time he had ever used those skills to save wild animals at the request of their parent. The kittens are scared and weak, Sarah explained to Emma as she prepared. For the climb, you may try to bite or scratch when you reach them, but they're too small to cause serious injury. The important thing is to get them out quickly and gently. Emma's ascent to the rock crevice was careful and methodical, with Mike belaying her from below while Sarah provided veterinary guidance about how to handle the traumatized babies. The mother bobcat watched every movement with intense focus, her vocalizations shifting from desperate cries to soft, encouraging sounds as she realized her babies were about to be rescued. When Emma reached the trapped kittens, she found 3 tiny bobcats, probably no more than 6 weeks old, huddled together in the narrow space. They were clearly weak and frightened, but alive and responsive. The largest of the 3 managed a faint hiss when Emma approached, demonstrating the fighting spirit that would help them survive their ordeal. "They're beautiful," Emma called down to her family as she carefully extracted the first kitten from the crevice. They looked just like miniature versions of their mom. The rescue process required 3 separate climbs to bring down each kitten, individually, with Emma demonstrating patience and skill that amazed her parents. Each baby was carefully placed in a soft carrier that Sarah had designed for transporting injured wildlife, providing warmth and security during their descent to ground level. The mother bobcat's reaction to seeing her babies safely retrieved was profound. She approached the carriers with obvious relief and began making soft maternal sounds that the kittens immediately responded to, their weak cries becoming stronger as they heard their mother's voice. "We did it," Jake said with satisfaction. As the last kitten was safely brought down from the rocks, "We actually saved them." But Sarah knew that the rescue was only the beginning of the challenge they faced. The successful extraction of the 3 bobcat kittens from their rocky prison marked the beginning of a more complex challenge, ensuring their survival after hours of exposure and providing care that would give them the best chance of thriving back in the wild. Sarah's veterinary expertise became crucial as she assessed each kitten's condition and developed a treatment plan that could be implemented in field conditions. "This little guy is hypothermic and severely dehydrated," Sarah said, examining the smallest of the 3 kittens with the portable veterinary equipment she had brought from home. "They all need immediate warming and fluids, but we have to be careful not to stress them further with too much handling." The mother bobcat's behavior during the medical assessment was remarkable. Rather than showing the defensive aggression typical of wild animals protecting their young, she seemed to understand that the humans were helping her babies. She positioned herself where she could observe Sarah's examination of each kitten, occasionally making soft vocalizations that appeared to be communicating information about their condition. "She's telling us which one was trapped longest," Emma observed, noting how the mother bobcat's attention focused on the smallest kitten whenever Sarah expressed concern about its condition. "She knows which baby needs the most help." Mike had established a temporary shelter using emergency tarps and sleeping bags, creating a warm, dry environment where the kittens could begin recovering from their ordeal. The space was designed to accommodate both the babies and their mother. Recognizing that separation would cause additional stress for the entire family, Jake proved invaluable in monitoring the kittens' vital signs and behavior. His natural affinity for animals allowing him to notice subtle changes that might indicate improvement or distress. His gentle approach to handling the babies seemed to calm them in ways that even Sarah's professional techniques couldn't achieve.
Oh.
The middle-sized one is getting stronger, Jake reported as he watched the kitten's responses to the warming treatments. He's starting to move around more, and his crying is getting louder. Sarah's treatment protocol focused on gradual rewarming and careful hydration. Using techniques adapted from domestic cat care but modified for wild bobcat physiology, each intervention had to be balanced against the stress of human handling, requiring constant assessment of whether the medical benefits outweighed the psychological costs to the babies. The mother bobcat's participation in the care of her kittens created a unique partnership between wild animal and human medicine. When Sarah needed to administer fluids to the most severely affected kitten, the mother positioned herself to provide comfort and reassurance, making the medical procedures less traumatic for the baby. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah admitted as she watched the mother bobcat carefully move one of the recovering kittens to a warmer spot in their makeshift shelter. "She's not just allowing us to help, she's actively participating in their care." As the night progressed, and the kittens showed signs of recovery, the question of what would happen next became increasingly important. The babies were too young to survive on their own, and the mother would need time to find a new den site to replace the area compromised by the rockslide. "They can't go back into the wild tonight," Sarah concluded after checking each kitten's condition. The babies need at least 24 to 48 hours of monitoring to make sure they don't have any delayed complications from the hypothermia and dehydration. The mother bobcat seemed to understand that her family would need extended human help. Rather than showing anxiety about the temporary captivity, she settled down with her kittens in the shelter Mike had created, demonstrating a level of trust that challenged everything the Henderson family knew about wild animal behavior. "She's choosing to stay with us," Mike realized. "She's decided that the safety we can provide is worth the risk of being around humans." The family faced a decision about how to manage this unprecedented situation. The morning after the dramatic rescue revealed the full extent of the trust that had developed between the bobcat family and their human rescuers. Sarah woke to find the mother bobcat calmly nursing her 3 kittens in the makeshift shelter, showing none of the stress or defensive behavior that would normally characterize a wild animal in captivity. Her peaceful acceptance of human proximity suggested that she understood the temporary nature of their arrangement and the necessity of accepting help for her baby's survival. "She's been awake all night watching us," Emma observed as she carefully approached the shelter to check on the kitten's condition. "She's not scared. She's just making sure we're trustworthy." Sarah's morning examination of the 3 babies revealed encouraging progress. The largest kitten, whom Jake had nicknamed Scout for his adventurous attempts to explore beyond his mother's reach, showed complete recovery from his ordeal and was nursing vigorously. The middle kitten, dubbed Hunter for his fierce determination, despite his small size, had regained most of his strength and was beginning to play with his siblings. The smallest kitten, whom Emma had named Hope because of his remarkable survival against the odds, still required careful monitoring. While his vital signs had stabilized and he was nursing successfully, his recovery from the severe hypothermia and dehydration would take additional time and attention. "Hope is going to be fine," Sarah assured the family as she watched the little bobcat snuggle close to his mother for warmth. "He just needs another day or 2 of rest and nutrition to fully recover from being trapped the longest." The mother bobcat's behavior during the medical examinations continued to amaze the Henderson family. She had learned to recognize Sarah's veterinary equipment and would position her kittens for easier examination when she saw the stethoscope or thermometer. Her cooperation suggested an understanding of medical care that went beyond simple tolerance of human activity. Mike spent the morning constructing a more permanent but temporary enclosure that would allow the bobcat family to remain outdoors while providing protection from weather and predators. His design incorporated multiple exit routes, recognizing that the mother's cooperation depended on her feeling that she could escape if necessary. "We're not keeping them captive," Mike explained to his children as they helped with the construction. "We're providing a safe space where they can recover while maintaining their wild nature and their ability to leave when they're ready." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's colleague from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, arrived that afternoon to assess the unprecedented situation and provide additional medical support for the kittens. Her expertise in wild bobcat behavior and physiology offered insights that would be crucial for ensuring the family's successful return to the wild. What you've documented here challenges fundamental assumptions about bobcat psychology, Dr. Walsh observed as she watched the mother calmly allow human examination of her babies. "This level of trust and cooperation suggests cognitive abilities that we've significantly underestimated in wildcats." The most remarkable development came when the mother bobcat began teaching her kittens to interact safely with humans. Rather than encouraging them to fear or avoid the Henderson family, she demonstrated calm, watchful behavior that the babies began to emulate. The kittens learned to tolerate gentle handling during medical examinations while maintaining their natural wariness and wild instincts. "She's teaching them that these particular humans are safe helpers," Dr. Walsh noted. "But she's not domesticating them. She's showing them how to cooperate temporarily while preserving their wild nature." As the second day of recovery progressed, all 3 kittens showed remarkable improvement. They were nursing regularly, maintaining body temperature effectively, and beginning to display the playful behaviors typical of healthy young bobcats. Their mother's stress levels had decreased dramatically. She was beginning to scout the area around the enclosure, suggesting she was evaluating potential den sites for when her family was ready to return to complete independence. The success of the rescue and recovery created a unique situation that would require careful management to ensure the bobcat family's successful transition back to wildlife. 3 weeks after the dramatic midnight rescue, the relationship between the Henderson family and their bobcat guests had evolved into something unprecedented in wildlife management history. The mother bobcat, whom the family had started calling Courage for her brave decision to seek human help, had established a routine that balanced her wild instincts with her continued trust in the humans who had saved her babies. Scout, Hunter, and Hope had grown into healthy, energetic kittens whose playful antics brought daily joy to the Henderson household. Their development under the combined care of their wild mother and human protectors had created unique animals who possessed both the survival skills necessary for wildlife and an understanding of humans that would serve them well in the increasingly human-influenced landscape of Colorado's mountains. "They're perfect wild bobcats," Sarah observed as she watched the kittens practice hunting skills under their mother's guidance. "Courage has taught them everything they need to know about being predators, but she's also shown them that humans can sometimes be allies rather than threats." Dr. Walsh had been documenting the family's development for what would become a groundbreaking study in human-wildlife cooperation. The data she collected challenged existing protocols for wildlife rehabilitation and suggested new approaches. 2. Managing human-animal conflicts in areas where development and wild habitat intersected. What Courage has demonstrated is that wild animals are capable of making sophisticated decisions about when to trust humans and how to maintain their wild nature while accepting temporary help. Dr. Walsh explained to the Wildlife Management Conference where she would present her findings. "She's shown us that intelligence and adaptability in wild animals far exceeds what we previously believed possible. The transition back to complete wildlife had been gradual and carefully managed. Courage had begun spending days hunting and exploring with her kittens while returning to the Henderson property each evening, using their home as a secure base camp while her babies developed the skills and confidence necessary for independent survival. She's treating our property like a natural territory," Mike observed. "She hunts, teaches her kittens, and explores during the day. But she knows this is a safe place to return to when they need rest or protection." The most touching aspect of the ongoing relationship was the kittens' individual personalities and their unique connections with different members of the Henderson family. Scout had developed a special bond with Emma, often seeking her out for gentle interaction when the family was outside. Hunter showed particular trust in Jake, allowing the 12-year-old to observe his hunting practice sessions from remarkably close distances. Hope, still the smallest and most cautious of the three, had formed the strongest connection with Sarah, seeming to recognize her as the human who had provided the medical care that saved his life. The community impact of Courage's story had been profound. The Henderson family's experience had inspired new wildlife education programs throughout Colorado, teaching residents how to recognize when wild animals needed help and how to provide assistance safely and effectively. Their story had also influenced state wildlife policies, creating protocols for managing situations where wild animals actively sought human aid. Courage changed how we think about the relationship between humans and wildlife, Sarah reflected, as she watched the Bobcat family prepare for their final transition to complete independence. She showed us that cooperation is possible when we approach each other with respect and understanding. As autumn deepened into early winter, Courage made the decision that everyone had been anticipating. After ensuring her kittens were fully prepared for wildlife, she began spending longer periods away from the Henderson property, gradually transitioning her family to a den site deeper in the forest where they could live completely independent lives. The night of their final departure, Courage brought her 3 kittens to the Hendersons' back deck one last time. The entire family watched through their window as the mother Bobcat seemed to acknowledge their help with a long, direct look before leading Scout, Hunter, and Hope into the forest toward their new wild home. She was saying goodbye, Emma whispered, as the 4 Bobcats disappeared into the darkness. And thank you. What began as desperate scratching at a door on a stormy night became one of the most extraordinary examples of interspecies trust and cooperation ever documented. Courage's shocking decision to seek help from humans when her kittens were trapped challenged everything we thought we knew about wild animal behavior and opened new possibilities for human-wildlife relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. Today, Scout, Hunter, and Hope thrive in the Colorado wilderness there. Successful survival, a testament to the power of cooperation between species when desperation meets compassion. Their story has revolutionized wildlife management practices and inspired communities across the country to develop protocols for helping wild animals in crisis, while preserving their essential wild nature. Courage's incredible journey from desperate mother to trusted partner proved that wild animals are capable of sophisticated decision-making, a risk assessment, and trust that we have only begun to understand. Her willingness to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming to seek help from natural enemies, to which maternal love will go to protect the innocent. The Henderson family's shocking decision to follow a wild predator into a dark forest during a storm shows us that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from ordinary people who choose to answer a call for help, regardless of how unusual or dangerous that call might seem. Their willingness to trust Courage's guidance and risk their own safety to save her kittens created a bond that transcends the boundaries between wild and domestic, predator and protector. The 3 kittens' successful development under the combined care of their wild mother and human helpers proves that cooperation between species can create stronger, more adaptable animals who are better equipped to survive in a world where human and wildlife territories increasingly overlap. Courage's story teaches us that family love knows no boundaries and that the most unlikely partnerships can emerge when one being has the courage to ask for help and another has the compassion to answer that call. Her midnight visit to the Hendersons' door reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary relationships begin with someone simply knocking and asking for help. If this incredible story of maternal courage and the power of interspecies cooperation moved you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more amazing wildlife rescue stories. Like this video and share it with everyone who believes in the importance of helping those in desperate need, regardless of species. Comment below and tell us about a time when you helped a wild animal in distress or witnessed unexpected cooperation between different species. Your story might inspire our next heartwarming video. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey. And remember, sometimes the most shocking discoveries come when we have the courage to follow those who need our help into the unknown.